Hello and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Maniel, CEO of the Cultural Communications Agency, The Flash. Each episode, I bring in a different business leader who's doing some really game-changing work. And in this episode, I am so thrilled to have Surabhi Lal, who's a professor and leadership consultant focused on the better future of work. We're going to have some laughs and some great conversation around what that all means. Take a listen. Hey, Surabhi.
Hi, Laura.
Long time no see.
We'll fix that soon.
I know. Damn COVID. But the lights are opening up. It's spring has sprung, and so we are getting to a brighter future. I am confident.
Indeed.
And so with that, the podcast always starts the same first question. And so I'm very curious for your answer. So Surabhi, what was your first job?
So I was thinking about this and I can't remember exactly what my first job was. It was one of two things. So I worked at the Disney store, had a lovely gray pleated skirt, and in the mall, that was one of my jobs, one of my first jobs. And the other job was working in a science lab as part of a high school program. So really different experiences, as you might imagine. And I think that kind of goes to some of the work that I've done, which is exploring work and workplaces, from being able to see a lot of different workplaces and work environments through talking with people and actually experiencing them myself.
Awesome. And so you've come a long way since the Disney store. Tell us that career journey.
Wow, it's been meandering. So I wanted to be a pediatrician when I got into college. Quickly realized that I did not like needles and loved children. So that was going to be difficult, right? So that wasn't going to work. That and my intro bio class put an end to that, to the pediatrician piece. And then started looking at something that had been important to me for a long time, which is thinking about inequity globally. And so wanted to work in international development work. And at the same time, started getting really involved in the college community in leadership roles. So as an orientation leader, as an RA, and I realized there was something to community building that was taking up way more of my time than my academics, which led me to go to the University of Vermont for my degree in higher education and student affairs. And since then, I've worked in colleges and universities to both build community and work on transition points. So I first started working with first-year college students, which is a huge transition for so many people because they're leaving their families, they're independent, and then also taught me about how you welcome people into a community, and then ended with the last 15 years working in career development. So how people are thinking about their next step. So this other point in transition, from wearing a student hat to the work world, and then everything in between. So I've worked with new professionals and mid-career professionals and people who are in their encore careers who've already had a really full career but aren't ready to retire, which led me to collecting thousands of stories about workplaces, and that plus community building plus my interest in management kind of leads me to thinking about how we create better futures of work. And so for me, I do that in a couple of different ways. I teach at NYU Wagner, which is the Graduate School of Public Service, and I teach a core management and leadership class as well as a workplace effectiveness class. Because selfishly, I want people who are taking care of our government and taking care of our social services to have really good management, because ultimately that benefits us societally and me personally.
Totally.
From a personal level, I just think that good management is so important, and management and leadership connected together are what, when I hear people what they are looking for, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for managers that are good leaders, and they're looking for leaders that are good managers. And so that I get to have those conversations throughout the year with my students. I do some individual career coaching, which is great because it keeps me current on what's happening for people individually when they look for work, when they leave work, is an incredible source of information and firsthand information about what's going on in the workplace. And then on a team level for organizations, I work with them around how they can build a better future of work themselves as a team. So what is your shared purpose? What are the shared values that you bring into your work? What are the shared skills that you have, and how can you work together? And how can you work together so that you're bringing out the best in one another, even when you might want to approach a project differently than I want to approach a project. It does not have to be a conflict. So that is part of the teamwork. And then on a kind of system wide, kind of what are we doing in the world of work, I find myself in a really interesting moment. As you know, as we come out of this pandemic, people are thinking about, are we going to be hybrid? Are we going to be full-time in person? Are we going to be fully remote? And all of those have really different ways in which you want to manage and lead the organization, and how you want to include the people who work with you and work in your work community differently. And so I do some writing, and also have been thinking about, on a system level, who's doing some really interesting work. And overlaid for me in all of that is how do we bring as many talented people together as possible, who are come from diverse experiences, because they make for stronger teams, but those teams have to be managed really, really well to get the benefit of a diverse workplace. And thinking about how we come back to work, how we do that in an equitable way, is also one of the things that I have been watching really keenly recently.
Awesome. And so I think it's interesting because, like, the timing for our conversation is obviously, as always, perfect, because people are now making plans to go back to work after a year of working at home, and people are freaking the heck out. So what's your advice for a leader right now in terms of, like, how to navigate bringing the teams back in a way that makes sense and lends itself to having empathy and understanding around your employees?
So this, I think, is the question of the moment and of the right now, because we've heard all sorts of things, right? We've heard leaders say, come the fall, everyone is coming back. It doesn't matter who you are, what your life circumstances. I want everybody in the office. We've heard leaders who are surveying their employees right now to find out what their employees want, which I think is a really great approach, because you're asking people to give input and co-create. And frankly, you are going to be smarter as a leader to make those decisions if you're getting input from your team and from your employees. And then we saw 6 months ago some employers who said, we're going to be fully remote. Now, I think the fully remote and the fully in the office, we know how to do that, right? People have done fully in the office. People have done fully remote. Many people have done that for the last year. The hybrid is really interesting. It brings up really, really interesting questions around equity. And I think these are some of the questions that leaders need to be thinking about, which is, who is saying they want to come back into the office, and who is saying that they want to work remotely? What I have read in terms of studies, and I think this is true from conversations I've had as well, is that many people who want to go into the office are people who don't have caregiving responsibilities. They may already be seen as legitimate in the office. They may already be seen as part of the in crowd. And what all of that is going to do is just fire up that confirmation bias of the people that we see daily, and the affirmation bias. The people that we see daily that we're close to are the people who are in the room in our heads. And the people who aren't in the room in our heads are the people who are going to be working remotely. So I've seen some companies do some really interesting things around, we are going to be hybrid, but the days that people are in the office, the whole team is going to be together in the office, which I think is one way of getting at equity. Another is thinking about, how do we want to have meetings? Do we want to have meetings in a boardroom, or can we have collective meetings from everyone at their office? So we are in effect structuring ways for people to get into a conversation more equitably. So I think the hybrid place is a really, really interesting place to think about how can we be innovative? How can we be creative? How can we bring in voices that maybe weren't always interested in raising their hand, or if they were raising their hand, weren't always heard? And then for people who are coming back to the office and have said, this is what we're going to do, I would say to those leaders, expect attrition. Full stop, right? A recent study that I read by Fairy God Boss and Information said that 1/3 of women of color are thinking about leaving their jobs.
Wow.
At the moment.
But not surprising.
Not surprising. Not surprising to you and I, for sure. But not surprising at all as somebody who's been hearing career stories, and many people who have been saying, I don't know if the pandemic has caused me to rethink what I want to do with my life. So number one, we're in this moment of people saying, is what I've been doing for the last however many years the thing I want to continue to do? And wow, working from home has provided me more flexibility, more time with my family, more time to pursue my hobbies, more time to bake bread, do something creative, work on my side hustle. I really don't want to commute an hour or two. And the other thing that we have heard loud and clear is that for many people, they have more of a sense of belonging with their colleagues while they are working remotely. And I think that is really important to think about as we think about return to office, because what is it in the office that is making people feel like they're not belonging? And some of it has to do with not facing daily microaggressions. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have an incredible opportunity, right? We have an incredible opportunity to be innovative, to be thoughtful, to raise the bar around creating a more equitable and inclusive workplace where people really feel like they belong, and to be able to hire people from all over the place that bring different perspectives. So I think how companies decide to do this right now, and people are going to do it in multitudes of different ways, is really, really exciting.
Awesome. And I think that's a thing that people are trying to like wrap their arms around now, is that like, what is about the organization that's going to make it more inclusive as people come back? Because, if you just take from the top of what you said, all the people can come back, well, that's probably going to be just straight single white guys. And we already know that when it comes to workplace development and a career advancement, who is in the first position, just by sneezing? White guys. So what can be done so that your new workplace, whatever that may look like, is more inclusive and makes people feel like they belong? So it's going to be very fascinating to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah. And for me, one of the key pieces, and I hope that people are thinking about this, my optimistic side says that people are doing it. And then my realist skeptic side says nobody's really doing this, is how are you working with managers to give them the tools and skills to manage in this way? So we've all been managing through crisis for the last year plus. Now we can be a little bit more planful. But to say to a manager, particularly a newer manager or first-time manager, to say, okay, well, you have to manage everybody's return to office, good luck, to me is irresponsible, right? So how are you giving managers the tools to have those conversations? Are you asking your managers to ask questions like, what are you going to need as we prepare to return to the workplace? If your office has decided to do that, what are the things that you need? What are the pieces that you've learned about your work style in the last year that you want to bring into the office? And what are the things that you've learned about yourself in the last year that maybe we can work around to avoid because they haven't been helpful, right? These types of questions can start to really help managers understand their employees better, but also give managers ideas of how their team might function. Maybe people don't want to go back to a once a week meeting because they've been having 3 shorter meetings throughout the week and it's been more effective. Well, that's something that you can easily transfer, whether you're remote or hybrid or in person. You can do that, but you don't know unless you ask. You don't know unless you ask. And Laura, as a community builder, I mean, you know this, right? I think about workplaces as communities. And if you are just doing something for your community without getting their input, people are going to either leave, they're not going to feel included, or they're going to be grumbly about it. And that's just not a good way to manage a community. And it's not a good way for us to manage our workplaces either.
Yeah, I think people are forgetting that, like, you know, I was saying this to someone the other day, like, we've been living at work for over a year. And so that's why your employees are like, I am so burnt. I can't do this. I need to, like, give me a month off. And so if that, and you know, when people come back, then what? And I think we have to acknowledge that that's, one, been traumatic for your employees, and understanding that, like, you have to meet people where they are right at this moment. Because even if they had said 6 months ago, oh my God, I can't wait to go back to the office, where they are mentally, and, you know, just from a life standpoint, like the amount of people I know who've you know, decided, who never wanted to have kids, now have kids because they're like, well, you know, after this, yeah. Or the folks who suddenly became caregivers, not for kids but for parents, or if a spouse, you know, got a disease, you know, it because of the way people's lives is so drastically shifted. I think it's just imperative to understand that, like, not everything's going to fit back in a neat box. Like, I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, oh, and I'm like, dude, it's not going to be the same no matter what anybody tells you. They're not telling you the truth. And it's like, if that means taking some of your employees out for a lunch and just like taking their temperature, do it. Because what you assume they might be telling you versus what they really are thinking might be two drastically differently things.
Yeah, and you have to know, right? I mean, we community builders have known for a long time that it works better with community input. And I think workplaces have come out of this command and control. There's somebody at the top who knows best. And those are really two different things. And the way that people are thinking about work right now is moving away from the command and control, one person at the top is making all of the decisions, to something that we co-create together. And part of that is that even in this time, we know that a third of people are thinking about leaving work. When we talk about one community, there was another study I saw recently that said people are willing to forego a significant salary to be able to have flexibility. And so when you think about as a company and as a leader, if you want good talent, you need to listen to the talent. and yes, you need to put structure around that, and you need to make some guardrails around what that's going to be and set out some clear expectations. But if you're looking for talent right now, talent is saying, I want the choice, I want flexibility, and also I don't know if this is what I want to do. So I kind of need to make it, as a leader in a company, maybe I need to make it a little bit more enticing for folks to stay.
So what would your advice be for a company where, you know, they've been on high, like maybe they're part of a holding company, has said everyone has to go back to work? What are like the 2 or 3 things you'd say to senior management, like, you need to do this like today in order to like not lose half of your organization by September when you force them to come back?
Yeah. So I would say one is to listen, right? And maybe the question is not, maybe the messaging isn't you have to come back. The messaging is, we have decided that we are going to open the office and we are going to be a in-person office. What do you need to make that successful? Right? So it doesn't stop with, this is what we've decided. It comes with an invitation to say, what do you need to make this successful? So also coming back to the office may still allow for flexibility, right? So let's talk about what that looks like if somebody says, I need it to be flexible. What if somebody says, I realized in setting up my home office that I need these pieces of equipment to be productive? Well, that's a fix that seems very reasonable for folks to be able to take care of. But you don't know unless you ask. So that question of like, what do you need for this to work for you is a really important question. Do you need flexible hours? Do you need different kinds of work space? Do you need a certain cadence of meetings. So what do you need? What is that? Do you need something? Where are your pain points? Is it transportation? Is it commute time? Is it something else? So I think thinking about those questions and really framing them as an invitation to say, we need your input as employees who are going to be here. How can we make this successful for all of us?
Yeah, that's great, and necessary, because I am, even with my own team, I've sort of said that it's choose your own adventure. It's like, we're not going back to traditional office space because it doesn't make economic sense for us, but we're also going to have space available. So if you want to come in and get out of your house, I'm happy to pay for it. If you want to work with me, sitting next to me, you're welcome to. If you want to come to the space when I'm not there, also, I don't care. As long as you get your work done. If you want to do it for the beach in Jamaica, I do not care. And I think, letting folks say, like, you tell me what works for you and not being afraid of the answer. Because I think one of the things that I've been able to just do as a manager as I've kind of evolved with it is that, like, letting a lot of it go. I deliver, and it's also because of the team that I have. Like, I have a team where I'm the youngest person in the company, so everybody's older than me, and so, but yet I'm everyone's boss. So what I've tried to do as a manager is, like, you tell me what you guys need, to and don't think that I'm going to say no. Just tell me. Odds are I'll probably say yes, and I'm not afraid of. But I realize I'm not afraid of that no, and I think that's a difference that, like, leaders have to have. You have to be afraid of you don't have to be afraid of what the no is going to be, because the no is going to come with an answer. It's like, what? No, but, like, the yes and as long as you sort of go in with that positivity, like, yeah, I want to hear what you have to say, versus, oh God, what are they going to tell me? I think you'd be better off.
Yeah. And, the other thing that I think is really true is that this is where I think small and medium-sized businesses have an incredible advantage in this moment, which is knowing your employees, knowing that you may have some more flexibility in terms of number of staff, in terms of people, in terms of being able to move your work community in a different way than a behemoth organization. And so I think this is a place where small and medium-sized businesses can really seize the moment to say, okay, I might be able to offer something as a small and medium-sized business that somebody else isn't, which means I may also be able to attract talent that I couldn't otherwise, because people are looking for something different. And I think, Laura, you're right? You have to go in with saying, what if somebody comes up with the wildest scenario? I don't need to think about all of the holes. Maybe what I need to think about is what from that wild scenario could work, and how can we meet in the middle? Because obviously there need to be some guardrails. And the other thing that I heard in what you said is that there needs to be trust on the team. So if you haven't built trust with your team, you can start building trust. It's never too late to build trust. But trust is a huge part of this, which is
Definitely.
You trust your team to say, this is what I need. You're providing them avenues, and you trust that they're going to do their work, and they trust that if they do their work, you will allow them to continue, and that if their work isn't happening, then there's trust that there's a conversation that's going to happen to make the work happen. So I think that trust piece is also really critical, and asking people how they want to return and what they need to be successful in whatever that return to a workplace or an office or movement looks like is one way that you can build trust. Not the only way and not the only avenue, and not by itself enough, but it is an open door to building trust.
Awesome. So speaking about trust, and your experience, what do you think you'd tell 25-year-old Surabhi?
So one is trust yourself. So when I was 25, I wanted to do organizational behavioral consulting, and so many people said, you look too young, which, we could talk about later. They're like, you're going to have to wait till you get gray hair, because you're short and you're brown and you just look too young. And I thought, well, that's disappointing. And what I would tell myself is to just find work that speaks to you, and it will make sense. Your journey will make sense as you go through it. So I took jobs that I was really excited about, and I didn't have a 10, 15-year plan, but I took jobs that were meaningful to me. And it all seems to make sense in the next job and in the next job and in the next job. And I've taken skills from each of those jobs. So also jobs that you can learn something, and used it in every job thereafter. So it may not make sense to somebody else on the outside, but trust yourself, find a position where you can learn and continually strive to learn. And then it will make sense along the way.
Awesome. And great advice. So, since you're a college professor, what has been that like for your students as switching to remote and that experience? And like, what do you think is different about your students today than were last year?
I love teaching. It is one of the things that brings me great joy, and I learn so much from the process. Every semester I get to re-engage with the material and read it in a different light because of what's going on in the world, but also hear students' interpretations of it differently. And this past year, obviously, I've taught virtually. And one of the biggest compliments that I got from a student from my class last semester in the fall was that they met more people and made more relationships in our online class, the one that I taught with them, than they did in any other class. Wow. And for me, that's the power of building a community virtually. One, within the classroom, building a learning community virtually. Two, being really thoughtful about how you design a course for online versus in person. And just that kind of finding a space of connection at a time where people were feeling very isolated, to me was one of the best pieces of feedback I could get. But one of the things that I think is different for students now, and I teach graduate students, many of whom are working while going to school, some of whom are not working while going to school, some who have internships, so all different configurations of how their lives are set up, is that they're thinking more globally in terms of what kind of work do they want to do. And for many of them, because I teach in a school of public service, it has confirmed for them that their purpose to serve the greater community is even more intense. So teaching students who are in healthcare, for example, they've had these incredible experiences over the last year, having worked in hospitals, having worked in community health organizations, and really being on the front lines, as well as people who have been campaigning. And so I think it just makes all of those questions that these students have particularly been interested in even more salient. Because if we've learned nothing else, it is that we need people from all sectors to work on some of the problems that are going to lift us as a kind of whole global community, and the problems aren't going away.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I think more than anybody else I've learned is that like the world is your oyster at this point. You can work globally. You don't have to be stuck in working in a one small place here in Manhattan. You can be at your desk and work in Australia, and navigate that as best you possibly can. So it gives you a lot. Again, is that flexibility of work is now possible. And I think that's a big part about the ability to like stretch yourself in other ways you didn't expect. That's come out of this past year's foolishness.
100%. And one of the things that I have learned when talking with a lot of leaders through SIPs and Leadership, which you were on in December, is that it doesn't matter what seat you're in, you can decide to practice everyday leadership to change your community. And so that to me is something that I think many people are embracing in a different way, because we've all been impacted. We've all been impacted differently, but I think we can see small ways and big ways in which you can show up for folks.
It's so necessary. And speaking of showing up for folks, but showing up for yourself, what are you doing for your self-care, Surabhi?
So there's a little community garden that's 2.5 blocks away. And I've been going there at least on a weekly, if not multiple times a week. And it's been really, talking about stop and smell the roses, or maybe just stop and look at the flowers. To see over the past few months, the tulips have come and gone. Now there are irises that are up, and some other flowers. I don't actually know what they are, but I'm going to find out. They're these like purple fluffy balls. They're very pretty. That has been really great. And I've been walking the outer loop of the Central Park Reservoir. And so same thing, just you could see the trees in bloom. And then a few weeks later, you see them shedding their flowers. And so just one, being outside, and two, noticing some of the things that I wouldn't have noticed before because I would only be there periodically, or that I would be there to just not pay attention to the things that surround us. So those are two things that I really enjoyed, was kind of being out in this community garden and in Central Park. And then the other thing, as somebody who likes to cook and eat and food and all of that, is reacquainting myself with some neighborhood gems that I wouldn't have necessarily made the time to go to, and then continuing to do that as we move through different phases of being able to be out and about, and noticing that some new places have opened, and trying to get to know the owners, and really being extraordinarily friendly to the local small businesses.
Oh yeah, that's like the key thing right now. I think is a big one. It's like, get to know your neighborhood. I think this is the one thing we've all been so disconnected, even though we lived next door to people, or we saw the same restaurants all the time. And this past year is like, you've gotten to know those folks because we've all been in this weird struggle together. So there's a ton of value in holding on to what's in your community and expanding upon it. So that's good to hear that you're doing that.
Yes, lots of recommendations for Upper West Side folks. So Laura, when you come up this way, we could do a tour of some of my favorite places.
You know I love to drink and eat. So just tell me when. These are things Laura cares about. And so last question for you. Do you have a give and or an ask of the audience?
I do. So I have an invitation, which is for anyone who wants to talk about the work they're doing in their community, to hit me up, and we can talk about having you on Sips and Leadership, which is my LinkedIn Live series, which selfishly is a great time for me to talk with people who inspire me and are doing leadership work. And then that is my invitation to folks to connect, and then certainly to connect with me and talk about all things, how we can collectively make a better future of work. And for me, a better future of work also makes better communities. So I'm happy to connect with folks and talk about all of these things. How do we make better leaders? How do we manage better in service of a better future of work and better communities?
Awesome. Well, we could just keep on chatting for hours. But I will put all the show notes on for folks to get in contact with you. Go on Sips and Leadership, which is great. I had a lovely time when I came on. And thank you, my darling. It was so great to finally get you on the podcast.
Thank you. I know it's been years in the making.
Awesome. But it was worth the wait. Thank you so very much. And that is our show.